June 27th, 1967. 10:47 p.m. In a plush, silent office atop the Sands Hotel, a man decides to burn down a kingdom. He isn't holding a gun. He's holding a simple book of matches. His voice is a quiet, deadly monotone. You tell them they have 1 hour, or I will turn this desert jewel into a funeral pyre. The men facing him aren't cowards. They're hardened casino operators. And they are trembling, because they know this man. They know he means it. This is it. The end of an era. The death of a dream. The air is charged with the scent of impending annihilation. And then a knock? No, not a knock. The brass door handle turns. It swings open. And in walks Dean Martin. Tuxedo immaculate. Hair perfect. A glass of whiskey in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He scans the room of terrified faces, his eyes finally landing on the most feared mob boss in America. He grins that famous, lazy, all is right with the world grin. Pardon the intrusion, fellas. You haven't seen my wayward chairman, have you? We've got a room full of people waiting. The world stops. This is the story Hollywood buried. The night the mob's most violent threat was extinguished, not by a bigger gangster, but by a crooner who pretended not to notice the gasoline being poured. This is the secret that redefined power in Las Vegas. To comprehend the seismic gamble of that moment, you must first meet the real Dino Crocetti. Not the myth. Not the smiling drunk on stage. The boy from the steel town of Steubenville, Ohio, where the air tasted of coal dust and desperation. His father, a barber, whose hands were always slightly stained, spoke in the old tongue. Young Dino felt that otherness like a second skin. He wasn't just poor, he was different. And in those rough streets, difference could get you hurt. So he learned to watch, to listen. He learned in the only classrooms available. The betting parlors, the backroom poker games, the illegal speakeasies that flourished in the shadow of the mills. He dealt cards to men with hard eyes and concealed weapons. He served whiskey to figures who moved with a silent, dangerous authority. Here, he absorbed the unspoken curriculum of the underworld, the language of a slight nod, the meaning of a prolonged silence, the economy of fear. He wasn't a part of it. He was too smart, too ambitious for that, but he grew up in its ecosystem. He understood its predators, its rules, its grim price tags. This was the foundation upon which Dean Martin was built, not on melody, but on street-smart survival. The velvet voice came later. First, came the instinct to read a room before you entered it. An instinct that would one night save a fortune and possibly lives. Now, let's paint the gilded cage. The 1960s. Las Vegas. The Sands. It isn't just a hotel, it's the Vatican of cool, and the Rat Pack are its swinging, smoking, drinking priests. Dean Martin is the beloved cardinal. The performance is a well-oiled spectacle of chaos. Frank conducting the orchestra of adoration, Sammy defying gravity and prejudice, Joey Bishop with the dry one-liners. And Dean? Dean is the anchor, the relaxed center, the man who makes the impossible seem easy. But Dean, alone among them, never forgot the architecture beneath the glitter. While Frank Sinatra basked in the perceived power, courting the shadowy figures who owned the joints, Dean observed them. He was courteous. He was paisano. He shared a drink, a laugh, a language. But he maintained an invisible, electrified fence between himself and their business. He knew the difference between being an entertainer who was protected and being a partner who was owned. This tightrope walk was his masterpiece. He made it look like a stroll. But beneath the tuxedo, his muscles were always tensed for the fall. Because he knew the truth everyone else ignored. The real chairman of the board didn't sing on stage. They sat in unmarked offices, their ledgers written in blood and betrayal. And one of them was in the building tonight. Not for a show, for a reckoning. The catalyst for the explosion was, inevitably, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra lived by a code of extreme passion and extreme loyalty, which also meant extreme temper. A conflict had been brewing, a tangled web of a movie deal, the detective, and Frank's monumental casino credit at the Sands. Frank felt disrespected by the hotel's management, by the suits. In a volcanic rage, he confronted Carl Cohen, the Sands executive and a man with formidable connections. Words escalated. And then, the unthinkable. Sinatra, it was whispered, through a punch. Or a chair. Legends differ on the weapon, but not on the sin. In the world of the men who truly owned the chips, laying hands on a made man, or even a high-ranking associate, was not an insult. It was a declaration of war. It was a tearing up of the sacred contract. Frank's marker, a debt reaching into the millions, was now called in not as business, but as punishment. The message was sent to Chicago, and Chicago sent back its most chilling answer. Not a squad of button men. One man. A boss. A man whose presence meant the discussion was over. The verdict had already been decided. His tool of persuasion wasn't a ledger, but that book of matches. The threat wasn't to break knees. It was to erase an empire from the map. To send a message so profound, so terrifying, that no entertainer, no matter how big, would ever dare challenge the silent partners again. The Sands executives were not just negotiating. They were witnessing their own obituary being written in flame. Backstage, the clock was ticking toward showtime. Dean was ready, loose, the gentle buzz of pre-show scotch warming his veins. But Frank was missing. This was unusual. Frank was a tyrant about punctuality. A low-grade annoyance stirred in Dean. Probably in a high-stakes card game. Or holding court in the casino. Then, a whispered rumor from a pale-faced stagehand. Mr. S. He's in a meeting. In the big office. With visitors. The way the kid said visitors made Dean's street-smart antennae twitch. He knew the codes. He asked one more question, his voice casual. What kind of visitors? The stagehand just shook his head, his eyes wide. That was all Dean needed to know. A cold clarity cut through the pleasant Scotch haze. This wasn't a business meeting. This was an execution. Every fiber of his survival instinct from Steubenville screamed at him. Asterisk walk away, Dino. Go to the stage. Sing your songs. This is not your world. This is quicksand. Asterisk, but another part of him, the part that remembered loyalty, however frayed, and the part that understood that if the sands burned, they all burned, calculated a different risk. He took a long, deliberate drag from his cigarette. He picked up his fresh drink. And he didn't walk to the stage. He turned and walked, with deliberate, steady steps, toward the chairman's office. He didn't know his plan. He only had his character. He didn't knock. Knocking would acknowledge a boundary he needed to obliterate. He turned the handle and entered as if he owned the air he breathed. The scene hit him like a physical blow. The pallor of the Sands men, the glacial fury radiating from the figure behind the desk, the two silent mountains flanking the door whose eyes were dead, black stones. The mob boss looked up. Their eyes met. In that nanosecond, Dean saw the abyss. This was a man for whom human life was a column in a ledger. Dean's heart was a jackhammer in his chest. But his face performed the greatest act of his career. It relaxed. The charming, slightly baffled smile spread effortlessly across his features. He didn't see a mob boss. He saw a fellow occupant of the planet. He let his gaze travel around the room with a kind of amiable curiosity, as if he'd stumbled into a dull board meeting. He held up his glass in a tiny, inclusive toast. Hey pal, you seen Sinatra? We're on in 10. The silence that followed was so absolute Dean could hear the ice melting in his own drink. The boss's expression didn't change, but Dean saw the minute flicker in his eyes, a shift from homicidal intent to pure, unadulterated confusion. This was a scenario his playbook didn't cover. How do you threaten a man who doesn't appear to recognize the threat? How do you maintain apocalyptic rage in the face of blissful, alcohol-scented ignorance? Dean leaned into the role, becoming the caricature they all expected. Dino, the lovable lush, adrift in his own world. He took another sip, waiting, his brow faintly furrowed in polite expectation for an answer about his missing friend. The mob boss stared a moment longer. Then, something miraculous happened. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile of friendship, but a smile of incredulity. Of almost artistic appreciation for the sheer, audacious gall of the performance. He knew Dean Martin. He liked his records. His mother loved him. He was Nostro Ragazzo, our boy who made good. The terrifying calculus of violence was suddenly complicated by a bizarre social inconvenience. The spell was broken. The singular focus on the matchbook was shattered. The boss finally let out a short, sharp breath. He gave a dismissive, almost imperceptible wave of his hand toward Dean, his eyes already sliding away, back to the terrified executives, as if swatting away a charming but irrelevant fly. The dismissal was clear. Get out. Dean, the master of reading a room, didn't need a translation. He nodded amiably, as if the boss had just given him perfect directions. Right? Sweet. Thanks. Don't work too hard, gentlemen. And with that, he backed out, pulling the door shut with a soft, definitive click. He stood in the hallway for a second, the cold sweat now prickling down his spine. The performance was over. The danger was more real than ever. But he had done it. He had injected a virus of absurdity into a room of pure terror. He had changed the narrative. The immediate inferno was averted. But the aftermath was a landscape of cold ruin. Negotiations resumed, now under a cloud of bitter humiliation for all parties. Sinatra was forced to pay his debt under crushing terms, a financial and ego-crushing blow that felt like a surrender. He never forgave the Sands. And he never truly forgave Dean. In Frank's mind, Dean's intervention had weakened his position, had made him look like a child whose big brother had to step in. The Rat Pack's magic was fatally wounded. The Brotherhood fractured on a fundamental level of pride and perceived betrayal. For Dean, the cost was internal. The easy smile became, at times, a mask he had to consciously wear. The Vegas he loved was now permanently stained with the memory of that cold, flat gaze across the desk. He began to pull back, finding solace in the controlled environment of his TV show, in the quiet of the golf course. He had proven that his cool wasn't an act of indifference, but an act of immense, steely courage. He had faced the dragon not with a sword, but with a martini glass and a manufactured grin, using the world's underestimation of him as his ultimate weapon. So, what really happened in that room? Was Dean Martin truly that oblivious? Or was Dino Crocetti, the street-smart kid from Steubenville, executing the most brilliant piece of psychological warfare in Hollywood history? He didn't just walk into a room. He walked into a narrative of violence and rewrote it as a comedy of errors. He reminded a king of the underworld that there were still spheres of influence, of fame, of public love, of iconic status, that even he couldn't control with a matchbook. Dean Martin saved the Sands that night, but he sacrificed a piece of his own legend to do it. He showed the world that the real power sometimes lies not in the threat, but in the refusal to even acknowledge it. The King of Cool didn't just avoid the fire. He made the man holding the match forget, for just one crucial moment, why he wanted to light it in the first place. This is the hidden cost of cool. The secret battles fought in silent rooms. What other legends are built on moments of terrifying, hidden courage? How many of your favorite stars had to stare into the abyss with a smile on their face? The story of old Hollywood is written in shadows and spotlights. And sometimes, the brightest smiles hid the darkest calculations. This has been a revelation from the Hollywood Untold files. If this hidden truth pulled back the curtain for you, imagine what other secrets are waiting in the vault. What deal was made with the devil to save a career? What romance was a weapon? What laugh was a mask for a scream? Subscribe now, because next time, we go deeper. We examine the star who wasn't just owned by the mob. She was married to them. And the price she paid was her soul. Until then, remember, in Hollywood, the greatest performances were never captured on film.